Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love, alongside my co-host Shamika Michelle. Wilfred Riley is off somewhere shaping young minds, helping the kids in college. Our guest this week is Nancy Rommelmann. She is an author and journalist, and she writes for Reason, the Wall Street Journal. She's a five-time author. We're going to get into some of those things because she writes about very interesting topics, and wanted to have her on to talk about all of that and more. Nancy, welcome to the show.
I'm really glad to be here with you guys, and also recording in the evenings. I'm usually my podcast we record in the morning, including this morning at 9 o'clock. So 12 hours later, it's good to be here.
Oh, okay. So we're going to talk about that podcast too, and many other things. So I was saying, so Nancy gave me a great tidbit. She's like, she's a pro. She's always ready to go. She's like, put it all on air, so don't hold back. So Nancy's one of the guests where the reason she's here is kind of multi-layered, right? I discovered her about a year ago. She was interesting. I said, it'd be great to talk to her. Then, something else happens. I'm like, that's something else to talk about. Then she took some interesting trips. I was going to talk about that. Then she just dropped a piece a few days ago about Portland. But what you may not know, Nancy, is that we've been doing a series of shows kind of tied around different towns. So we had this idea to say, okay, everybody's talking about culture and wokeness and crime and all these other things, ironically. And I said, we should find people in all these different cities because they all experience the same things, but in a different way based on the size of the town, the makeup of the demographics of the city. So we were bringing people on to talk about their cities. Tell me about your town. Tell me what it was like before, pre-George Floyd, and then after. So we talked to Matt Rosenberg, who was interesting because he's in Seattle. He was from Chicago. He's been in Seattle for 20 years, and he wrote on both. So he lived in both cities. We talked to David Marcus about New York. We were talking to all these people. And, of the many things I wanted to talk to you about, you wrote this piece about Portland, and Portland was a city we hadn't talked about yet. So I think we'll start there and get to some other things. So you've been blogging about Portland for a while, and you can kind of intersperse some of those things. But I want to start with obviously your recent piece, A Murder in Portland, and the Washington Examiner, and the companion piece that you wrote about it. So it was really, if you all haven't read it, you should. It was a really sad story about a murder in Portland. But we hear about these things all the time. And I was telling my wife about the article earlier, and I said, what's interesting about this piece is we watch, because she and I do this, we watch the local news and somebody gets arrested for something. And when they say, oh, that's sad, New York, they push somebody on the train, they stab somebody, that's sad. And then they catch them a few days later, and it's like, we found him, it's Bob, and he has a record as long as his arm, right? And then it's like time after time after time. So many times, Chicago and New York, people will say, look at how many times we've had this crime. They keep letting all these people out. So we end up talking about a bunch of stories to show a pattern, but we don't really deep dive into the story, where you turned it the other way and just took this one story and talked about and went deep into the story about all the problems and all the failures that led to it. So tell us a bit about this particular murder in Portland.
Well, again, thanks for having me, guys. I'm happy to talk about Portland. I am a New York City girl, then had a big 18 years in LA, and then moved to Portland in 2004, when Portland was sort of a small city on the ascent. And I left in 2019, having seen Portland go, had its star turn on the stage, and then it was starting as I put in one piece, the milk from the goat in the front yard was starting to curdle. And you had some very angry young people wondering why they hadn't, in my view, had their turn. In any case, I think what city in America rioted harder and longer than any other city after George Floyd was killed? Well, that was Portland. And very, very, very anti-Trump and had been since before he was elected, and marched. And then, they were destroying their own property because these are young people without a ton of ideas and a ton of ways to do things, but they're super good at tearing things down. Like it's sort of like a toddler. If I'm a parent, Shamika's a parent. I don't know if you're a parent, Charles. They're these small ones. They're super great at breaking stuff. But it's like, okay, kids, let's build it back up. It's like, no, not interested. So what happens when you let a city do this for that long? Well, you start to make laws that make it okay. Is it okay to break a window? Well, usually not. Oh, but now it is. Is it okay to set a fire? No, but now it is, because it's anti-Trump and we're the good people. We're the good people. So you start getting a city that changes its policies, and parts of the policies that it was changing was they did not want to incarcerate people, which I think we can agree in many ways is okay. Like if someone, well, now pot is legal almost everybody, but like you get busted for a joint. Do I want this guy in jail? I really don't. You don't want to be clogging up the system. But then the definition of what should someone the definition of a violent crime becomes very flexible. And what we saw in this story that I wrote, which was about the murder of a 36-year-old mother of 6, Rachael Abraham, by her former partner, Mohammed Adan, who's 33, who's a Somali immigrant. We saw him repeatedly arrested all year, actually starting at the end of 2021, for assaulting her. Now, when I'm saying assault, I'm not saying like, even though this is terrible enough, like he slapped her in the face. No, he put a gun to her head. He stepped on her windpipe. He had 5 counts of felony strangulation against him. They had a restraining order. He had a GPS, which he tore off and went back and attacked her again. And this happened all summer. And he kept getting let out of jail for no bail. Now, the reasons are complicated. The reasons are, it's a long story. The way Portland has its system of justice, it's actually not the DA. Like they can suggest a bail, but then there's this assessor that comes in and says, is this guy okay to let him go? And then if they say this and that, then the judge has the discretion. Well, the judges are elected. It's been a very, very progressive environment that you don't want to incarcerate people. So he was let out for no bail 4 times. And then finally, or maybe 3 times, finally he was held for $20,000 bail for, interestingly, not the 5 counts of felony strangulation, but the contempt of court. So a bail fund that had been set up, I believe in 2018, only for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, came in and put up 10% bond, because that's what, if you have bail, it's $100,000, you got to come up with $10,000. Now, usually what happens, like, okay, so Charles, you and I, we go out and we steal a car. Okay. Well, hey man. And Shamika's like, okay, guys, I think you're jerks, but I'm going to put a second on my house to get you guys out of jail, because I want, I don't think you're violent criminals. You did something really stupid. I believe in you. You guys are going to, let me tell you, you guys are showing up for court because I put my house up for you guys. And that's usually how it works, right? Mom, grandma, friends come into, well, this is a bail fund that they don't know this guy. They got recommended by his defense attorneys, who are public defense attorneys, but they don't actually work for the state. It's kind of complicated, the system of justice there. And they come in and they're like, well, he's Black and he's also unemployed. So he ticks a lot of boxes. He's unemployed. He's an immigrant.
He's poor.
He's Black. He's poor. He's not working. And he seems to them like the sort of person that supports their mission. Now, I am going to mention also that Rachael Abraham was also Black. Okay, so that, I don't know, should that factor in? I think we should look at what people have done and then say, is this a good bet? I would not look at someone who had 5 counts of felony strangulation and put a gun to a woman's head and in front of her children and beaten her repeatedly and say, you know what? I think that this guy's a good bet. But they did. And a week later, he went and he murdered her. Well, so what happened in Portland? Portland became sort of a circular firing squad of the DA, who's extremely progressive, who did not prosecute 92% of the protesters who were arrested for, some not violent crimes, some violent during the protests. He, I think, I think he had the fright put to him a little bit. It did try to hold this guy. They'd asked for $65,000 bail, and then the judge said no. I mean, can you imagine this? the DA says he's got 5 counts of felony strangulation. We recommend $65,000 bail. And the judge goes, no bail.
The progressive DA said, finally,
Right.
we want to hold him 65, and they still say no, too high.
And that was at the beginning, and then the money just kept going down and down and down. So you got the DA pointing their fingers at the Portland Freedom Fund, which is the people that bailed him out. You've got the Portland Freedom Fund pointing their finger at the judge and saying, well, look, it's not our fault. The judge imposed a bail. And so we figured that, I mean, they didn't say this. This is me extrapolating. We figured that like what he did couldn't have been that bad because, you know, if it was bad, they would have held him. But here's the thing. When you take the definition of a violent crime and you make it this flexible in order to kind of suit your idea of being the good person, you're going to be the good people that don't put people in jail. And I sort of ended my article, not to kind of scoop myself, but to say like, you know, if Portland wants to know, you know, in addition to Muhammad Adan, who killed Rachael Abraham, you know, who is responsible for this? They should start by looking in the mirror. They asked for leniency and they got it.
Oh, that's not fair. I wanted to read that one because it was so good. It said,
I'm sorry.
He was released. It was really simple. You said that you asked the question. The answer is really simple. Muhammad Adan was released from jail because that's what the people of Portland said they wanted. Clean and simple.
I mean, they didn't say it specifically about this dude.
Right.
But even after she was murdered, you know, obviously it was big news for 3 or 4 days, but Portland for the second year in a row broke its murder record. And there have been 38 people murdered since she was murdered on August 27th. And I understand, you know, if you're a daily news reporter, you can't be spending all this time. I have the luxury of spending time on this. But you know what? Even after she was murdered, the only dive that any media in Portland took was Oregon Public Broadcasting. That's the, you know, the NPR station. Mm-hmm. And they had an interview with someone who was part of the Portland Freedom Fund. And basically their question was, so are you going to continue with your mission?
Yes, we are.
And, yes, we are. And but beyond that, yes, we are. Beyond that, it was ludicrous. I believe I'm getting that word right, or absurd.
For you to ask.
For them to be blaming Portland Freedom Fund. And I'm like, well, you know, will things change? I don't know. But we have 6 motherless children now. Right. That's a fact.
Shamika, what do you got for all of that?
Yeah, that's a lot. I was wondering, you kind of answered it, I guess, but initially I was wondering, was it just a result of Portland's progressive laws to kind of help people out, or if it was maybe a result coupled with the fact that a lot of times people don't take domestic violence seriously and they kind of act as if it's no big deal. But the fact that you said they've broken their murder record for, I guess, 2 years straight or something, yeah. It just seems like it's on a downward spiral across the board.
I think that's true. I think when you kind of loosen it for one area, you're kind of like axiomatically loosening across the board. But you know, you make a good point. One of the reasons why he didn't go like completely free, like every time without like, oh, we don't have to look at this guy, is because of the DV, the domestic violence. I didn't know they abbreviated it to DV, but they do. They do apparently take domestic violence seriously. They say they do. However, when you have 5 counts of felony strangulation and he's beating her with his prayer beads and he's putting a gun to her head, and then you let this happen, I don't see it. I quoted one woman who's an attorney in the piece as saying, you know, Portland fancies itself as progressive, but this is regressive. I mean, right. You cannot look at this and say, oh, we're doing better. We're doing better by women and children. They claim they want to be, and I actually don't doubt that they do, but I believe they're walking in the wrong direction.
Right.
Sure.
I think that you almost got to that point too. Because there's so many weird layers to, I mean, you would think it's obvious, to the fact that you're going to create policy specific to a certain group of people trying to fix a problem, and good intentions or not, just decide you're going to ignore some things. But one of the things you almost said, but you wrote about in the piece, but you go into detail, maybe you have a little bit more detail on it. So I never knew the numbers because we can't be experts in every field, right? But I like to say that my logic radar is tuned in better than most people. So you know how we all watch these cop shows, right? And they always have an episode. Every cop show has at least one episode where they're trying to catch a criminal, and some annoying bail bondsman comes in. It's like, I'm trying to get this dollar. I'm chasing down this guy. You can't block my money. So there's this contention between the police officers and this guy who's just trying to collect this bond, right? And I would always watch that and say, come on. I know it happens sometimes, let's be real. But most people aren't jumping bail. Because the TV shows act like every criminal. I think most people aren't jumping bail. And you alluded to it because you say, because where they get the 10% from is family, is putting up their house. So people are like, I want to know where you are. So there's a unintended, consequence to you just having an endless amount of money. And I'm sure this fund got more money after money started flowing everywhere from George Floyd.
Sure.
So they're just blind. Our job is, like they said, it's ludicrous to accuse us. What we do as a practice is bail people out. The judge set the bail. If there was no bail, we couldn't bail anybody out. All we do is do this. But the problem is they're not trying to check on the money. They don't care. So you wrote about it briefly, and you confirmed my assumption. So I think it was I didn't do the math. It was 39 or 67. So, somewhere around, it was a pretty high number. You're going to say that most of the people who show up, it's got to be somewhere in the 60% range or something like that. So small number, I think 7% of the people jump bail. And for them, it was over 60%, right?
You just, by the way, you just got all the numbers exactly correct. The average for people that either don't show back up for court or violate their parole or whatever it is they're violating, not parole, they're not coming back for court, showing up, is 7%. If someone has bailed them out at 7%, it makes total sense. It's grandma. All right. You're gonna mess around with grandma, you're not gonna do it. The Portland Freedom Fund, of the 67 cases, people that they bailed out, 39 did not. Now, okay.
It's not funny, but it's insane.
But it makes sense because look, it's unfortunate, but when I first found out about this story, I, of course, Portland Freedom Fund still had all their social media up. And one of their pages they had was their Facebook page, which really, as I put in the piece, was sort of like a repository for love for them, like love from the community. Look at what we're doing for people. And there was a picture of someone with Portland Freedom Fund. I believe it was the head of it, Amanda Trujillo. She had prisoners' release papers in her hand, fanned out like a fan. And you could see the sort of like tender pride. Look what we have done. Look at, we are the good people. And I'm not saying that like, oh, look, we're the good people. I think they really felt that they were trying to make up for terrible policies in this country. And it was the time, they had a very receptive audience, and it was the right city and the right time, and they had the money. But how did the people, I've read about some of the other people that they bailed out. Well, one of them's in federal prison for 10 years for throwing, Molotov cocktails at federal forces. Not a great idea.
Hey, at least they got 10 years because the two lawyers who threw Molotov cocktails in New York obviously didn't get nearly that much time.
What did they get?
Oh, it got reduced. I can't remember the final number. It's 2 years maybe. It's nothing. And they threw it in a car with police officers in it.
But
van or whatever it was.
The people, a lot of them, or a few of them that I read about, had gone off to another state and done something terrible, but they don't know this woman, this white woman in where does she live? She lives in Milwaukee, which is just outside of Portland, a little like exurb. It's like, it's this person that they probably don't even ever meet her. Right. It's like, oh, their defense attorney got them someone and it's great, and like maybe they don't care. I don't know, but it's not a good record. Now, it's interesting. Someone said to me the other day, oh, she's probably just preparing to regroup and, get some more money. And of course, what do people always say? Oh, George Soros is sending her money. I'm like, it's probably not George Soros. It's probably guilty Portlanders trying to
regular people.
Right, exactly. Giving them $10, $50. And actually, before they took their social media off, I could see that. It was like $100, $50. People just wanting, like, you're not going to be the person that goes out into the streets. When I covered the protests in Portland, I was out there at night, and the people, throwing lit barbecues and flashlights and grenades. It's just a mess. But in the morning, I went out one morning at 5. I'm like, who's here in the morning cleaning up? You had the very quiet librarian who told me, well, I can't really, I'm not going to come out here at night, but I can come and do my part. Like, he was there at 5 o'clock in the morning, setting up tables with water and scrambled eggs or whatever he was doing. Right. So the people that send $50 to the Portland Freedom Fund, they feel that they're doing the right thing. I don't know that this particular woman will come back. She's been seriously pilloried in the community.
which was a good thing. I'm surprised that people did that, kind of did that. But let me ask you this. I want to ask Shamika this too, because I would love to hear this, because we talk about this kind of stuff a lot. We talk about culture so much. And this is important because it's all human nature. So I get upset by the way some people reacted sometimes, but I'm never really surprised. The only thing that's ever surprised me, and this the question kind of leads to it, because I say radicals have always been there, right? That's not new, but we used to not be so easy to condone them, right? We used to be like, get out of here, right? And now you got the people with power, people in the media, people in politicians, who's giving them power, right? So to that I say, but at the same time, Nancy, you alluded to it. There's the George Soros type, there's the political type on either side. There's people who have an angle to play, and there's grifters trying to make money. But the vast majority of these people just think they're doing good. So I give them that credit, right? Whatever. But my thing is, after 2 years of proof, city after city, that this is not working, when murders in your city are up 200%, right? When every single car in San Francisco has been broken into block, they are literally breaking into every car on the block. Every city has crime problems, but they manifest themselves differently, right? Some cities have more murders, but then they have an insane number of flash mobs of robbing Walgreens. The other city where we don't really have the flash mobs, we have murder and carjacking. Right. So this is happening. So why is it, Shamika, you first? Why is it, do you think, beyond those other groups? We know they exist, but beyond those, there's people who really just think Black people got it hard, I want to help. Poor people got it hard, I want to help. Why is it that 2 years later, when they see the murder in those communities are still going up, when they see, Black people saying that's not really helping, that, I can't go to work now because the business I used to work at is closed. When they see that, why do they still say, this is the way to go? We still think, it's a net gain.
Well, first of all, because it doesn't matter what Black people say. Like if Black people say, oh, that's not helping us, that's tearing down our community, it's not, it's not keeping us safe. We're stupid in most of their eyes, although they would never admit it. They're helping us and we don't know any better. So even if we say this isn't good for us, we're stupid, we're ignorant, we don't know, and they know what's best, which is why I often say they are, to me, the most racist people on the planet, because you feel like we're so ignorant, we're so stupid, we can't even be trained. Dogs can more easily be trained to sit, roll over, fetch, run than a Black person. To a lot of them, there's just nothing that we can do for ourselves. We can't think for ourselves, and we need them.
Wait, I wanted you to get into a second part of that. I want a second part to that, but to that, you make a point. I think that they don't realize that they do that because the words matter to me. So they would say the same thing you just said, but because they use different words, they say, no, but we know that A plus B equals C, right? So they'll say, but I didn't say A plus B, I said B plus A, right? It's the same thing. So what they'll say, they won't say Blacks are too stupid. They say things like, well, I've been fortunate enough for my parents to send me to a really good school, and most Black people didn't go to Harvard, which is a true thing, right? So I want to use my Harvard education to help them, right? I remember really quickly, because you just made me think about it. I remember listening to a radio show. I think I wrote about it in my first book because it just made me so apoplectic. This guy, and you can tell he meant it. He was coming from a nice place. He wasn't trying to be rude, but he was like, what are the problems in education in the Black community? It's like, well, it's just not fair. Of course they're struggling. I got into education. I wanted to help poor Blacks because I saw this. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I grew up in a working class community, but it was mostly white. And I know that the C student from my school, high school, is smarter than the valedictorian at most Black schools. So how do you expect them to compete? So he's saying that like it's helping. You just said even the smart Black kids are dumb, dude. That's what you just said. It's like, yeah, but what I'm also saying is that, so I'm willing to use my resources to help them because they can't help themselves. Even the smart ones are dumb. So he said what you said, but because the words sounded more flowery, it's like kind of like, well, obviously I didn't say what Shamika just said, but in essence, they just said those words. So you're right.
Yeah, and a lot of Black academics, people that went to Harvard and Yale, then turn around, and you have your people like Nicole Hannah-Jones that will tell Black people, you're oppressed. And people will pay $30,000 to $40,000 to hear her, tell them you can't do anything because you're oppressed. Although she did it, she overcame these same barriers that she wants to tell other people they can't overcome. And as long as we have both those white liberals or just elites that feel like Black people are stupid, and then the Black people that, make a lot of money from also telling Black people that they're stupid and oppressed and they're, going to be held back because of their skin color, unless people actually stand up and stand 10 toes down and stand against that, it's going to keep happening all of the time because it's very lucrative on either side, to have people kind of in this space where they even feel like they can't get ahead, because then you're constantly looking to someone, either that white savior or that Black person that you feel like you can trust, that's like, yeah, you need the white savior.
But don't they feel bad about the crime that they see? They still live in the city.
Do they?
I mean, where they do. I mean, where they do. Where they're living in New York or Chicago. But like you say, a lot of those places, they do end up moving to the suburbs or in certain areas, that kind of thing. So they're not experiencing it as directly or at that time. When it affects them, it tends to affect them a little bit further down the road. So maybe it just hasn't reached them yet. Nancy, what do you think?
I think Shamika's completely right. It's incredibly racist. It's incredible. And look at Portland. Portland, when I moved there, I may be getting the numbers wrong, and I'm sorry. It was 85% white, right? But very, very liberal. And as it got like more activists, they were absolutely the loudest about, we're going to protect everybody. Everybody's welcome here. I mean, I hate to tell you this, but this was in about, I don't know, 2017. And my husband had a series of coffee shops at that time. And he had a manager who came up to him. I'm actually not kidding. You're not going to believe this, but this is a true story. And she said, listen, I think we should station some of our white employees outside the door and offer to buy coffee for Black customers. And my husband was like, wait, what? And
can I ask you a question? It's going to be a naive question, but I've never been to Portland.
No.
I got to ask this question though.
Yes.
I almost channeled Shamika and said something I shouldn't say. Are there Black people in Portland?
Well, okay, so let me. I'm gonna get to that in a second, but let me just first tell you.
Who are you going to buy coffee from?
If you don't already know and love Camille Foster, you will love him now. So good friend, the Fifth Column records right in the studio where I am. And I texted these guys. I was like, you're not going to believe what one of my husband's employees just suggested. And Camille's like, I am going to fly out there with some of my Black friends just to fuck with this. Anyway, it was great. So is Portland Black? Yes, actually, there are some traditionally Black areas. I actually lived in one. My best neighbor I've ever had, Squeaky, was Black. And she was the most practical person about all of this going down. I'm like, all of the rioting and everything. I'm like, everybody marching. I heard George Floyd's name 5,000 times. I heard, kill all cops and all of this. And she's like, Nancy, look, have there been racist cops here in Portland? Hell yeah, there have been. Do we need the police? Yes, we do. Okay. She was a practical person, and there need to be more Squeakies in the world. Portland, you asked a question earlier, like why when they're seeing the crime and why when they're seeing the murder? Well, I think it's a couple of reasons. First of all, you don't want to believe you're wrong. It's hard to say you were wrong. It's hard to say, I wasn't. Then you have the people that were like super, 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 in that activism vein. They've gone off now. COVID's over. Maybe they went back to school. Maybe they left. They're not kind of doing what they were. But what else do you have? You have these laws that have been codified, right? So you have practices, you have policies that you've initiated for your business, for the government. And it's not as easy as just saying, well, that kind of didn't work. Like maybe we better backtrack a little bit. And then also, this whole thing, like, the idea that your Black neighbors don't know what's good for them, but you do, it's not only racist, but it's unbelievably benighted. Like, how the hell do you know? How do you, is this your world? No, of course it's not. It's what you're like saying from afar, or you're saying because you went to, Emerson or whatever it is. And Portland needs to, I also think Portland is, I think all cities will evolve. It's impossible not to evolve. I saw a very interesting evolution in Portland from about 2005 to 2014, when people really were kind of like doing things with their hands and creating restaurants and some media and architecture. And it just sort of calcified and got bitter and sort of weirdly juvenile. Maybe you're saying we're seeing these things, we're seeing the culture change. Maybe it will now roll into something a little more mature. And I hope so. And I hope with that maturity comes solid criminal justice reforms that help keep people alive.
I want to say one last thing about Portland, then we can move into all kind of other things. So in your companion piece, there's all kind of interesting thing, but you never know what's going to stick out to someone, obviously. And the one part that stuck out to me that made me laugh, you were talking about your husband. I guess obviously he was from there, not you.
Yeah. And
you started to talk about, like you say, moving there and the progression of the city as it evolved. And you talked about how there was also this kind of angst and this kind of conflict between groups of people, because it was the people who had been there for a while and all the new people.
Sure. Normal. That's normal stuff, right?
Right. But you said, yeah, right. That's my point about it being normal. You talked about people. I don't know if your husband said it or somebody else talked about how there was no one used to be in Portland that wasn't from somewhere in Oregon. And now you got all these outsiders there. And I laugh thinking about that, because you talk about, obviously, a lot of those progressive who wants to help the Blacks are talking about the problems of gentrification and all these other things. But this is not just a race thing. People do this across the board, right? So a lot of these people who were coming in were young white hipsters. I'm sure they weren't Black, but they still didn't want them there. So when people say, oh, great, these people are moving in our neighborhood, when they're Black, you say it's racist. But they do it when they're white. They do it when they're young. They do it when they're old. People like moving. It's like in Thomas Sowell writing about discrimination and disparities, and he talked about sorting. And we complain about we need diversity. Diversity is our strength, but people self-sort. And he talked about, he was writing about the post-World War II, when people were coming over. And Italians were coming over. Not only did they move to Italian neighborhoods, see, I knew about the Jewish tenements and all that stuff. He said, no. Even when the Italians moved into Italian neighborhoods, they moved into Sicilian neighborhoods, and they didn't even want to live next to other Italians who weren't from where they were from back home. They wanted to live in their own subset of the Italian neighborhood. So people do this. So I just thought that was interesting. And you never really hear about that. You wrote about that because you were talking about Portland, but you never really hear about that unless it's about race.
True. And I think you're alluding to the area when I moved to my neighborhood, when we got there, it was probably 70% Black where we bought our house. And then it changed, it's gentrification, people come in, there's gorgeous housing stock. We were one of them. And I wrote a piece called, There Goes the Neighborhood, Race, Real Estate and Gentrification on my blog. And people got crazily angry. We were the problem. We were both the problem and the solution, right? Because it brought a lot of, the neighborhood was kind of there was nothing, there were no stores. There was a bodega and a lawnmower store. That's it for 4 miles. So anyway, you bring industry, but as I think you maybe saw in the piece, one of the people that lived there said the solution to getting Portland back where it should be is taking people like me and my husband and to the park down the street and hanging us. That would make everything better. I'm like, okay. So anyway,
but that's the funny thing too, Shamika. They say whatever your views on gentrification. My thing is funny. Everything I say makes me go back to the Civil Rights Act of 64, which is why I think when the progressive get smart, I knew at some point they're going to come for it. I would keep telling people they're slowly doing it. They're going to come for it. They're going to have to, because how do you get the equity they say they want with this pesky little federal law that says you can't do that? Because you fought so hard to allow Blacks to move into neighborhoods where people forbade them. And that's true. And that's fair. And they should have done that. And that was bad. But now you're like, well, why white people move my neighborhood? How do you stop them? When you push for Blacks to move in neighborhoods, you didn't pass a law saying the Blacks should be able to move in white neighborhood law. You passed the everyone can live where they want law, which means whites can move into your neighborhood. So how are you going to, it's not even about whether it helps or hurt. I don't really care about that. They have the right to do it. How do you stop them?
My neighbor Squeaky, she was in my article. Her real name is Jelaine, but her dad named her Squeaky when she was a kid.
That's how we know she's Black, but go ahead.
She's great. She's the best, my favorite neighbor ever. But she said to me, I quote her in my article, she's like, it's pretty simple, Nancy. If you don't want white people to move in, don't sell your house.
Sell your house.
She didn't.
Right.
She didn't.
Exactly.
And what some people didn't. They stayed. And we have like a nice, mixed
Mixed
neighborhood.
neighborhood now,
We did. I
right?
don't live there anymore. But it was like, that's also an option. Well,
Mhm.
Yeah.
when you bought your house, I talked to some people that did sell. They're like, dad had bought it for, sold it for $450,000. It's like, then you take the money, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
That's okay too. You can choose what you want to do.
But then you're gonna not like stuff. Everything that you don't like can't be stopped. There's plenty of things I don't like. I don't complain about them because what can I do about it? You can't. It's not illegal. I mean, what are you gonna do? You're gonna try to fight white people from your neighbors, stop your neighbors from selling their houses. Then you're just like the white people. When the white person who wasn't racist said, "Hey, I want to sell my house," there's this lovely black couple, and then the neighbors would be like, it's not even that person's trying to discriminate, but the neighbors would be like, "Don't you sell to them?" It's the same thing. You're like, "Don't sell to these white people. I sell to who I want to sell to."
That's right.
Yeah,
All
well,
right.
the neighborhood I grew up in, they aren't even selling to white people. They're selling to Hispanics.
Hispanics.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I find that as a problem, but people
Why?
don't hold on to mom and dad's or grandma's house. Like you said, they sell it, they take the cash and they're gone. But then they say, oh, the neighborhood is not what it used to be. Well, you didn't do what you could have done to ensure that the neighborhood would always stay the same.
And then a lot of times they end up selling in the middle. So they do make money. But like Nancy's example is a great example, but people don't always do that. Some people, bought for 20 and they sell for 80. And then that person sells for $500,000, right? So they just sell a little too soon. But yeah, I mean, people are going to buy wherever they want to buy. And I mean, people are going to always be complaining about this, but it's really nothing you can do about it until they repeal the Civil Rights Act and all the other acts, which they're going to work on. Hopefully it won't happen, but they are going to go after it, right? Because, how else can we do what they're doing in schools and all this stuff and win all the lawsuits unless we just scrap that? But I want to talk about some other things too. I want to talk about what I find is your interesting views on feminism. So I was listening to your podcast, right? What is it? Smoke 'em if you got them.
Smoke If You Got Him with the Dallas journalist Sarah Hepola, who's
and like I said to you, I'm listening and I reached out to you. I was like, I'm glad you're coming on, but you need to tell Sarah I want her on.
I will. I'll tell her. I was
like, Sarah's awesome. So we're listening to it. And it was one thing that struck. You remember I sent Shamika a link because I wanted, because I loved Shamika talking about these topics anyway. So to hear you and her or Sarah and her talking about the thing. So did you get a chance to check it out, Shamika?
Yes, I was able to listen to a little bit of it.
So it was you were talking about, for those people, they should check out the podcast. It's really interesting. They're both really interesting people. But like I was telling Shamika, so I had to preface this. They ramble. So they
sorry. a little bit.
I said they jump, so you got to grab. And until you listen to it for a while, I mean, I know Nancy, and for a second, I'm like, who's talking? But then I got used to the voices. But they were talking about all these different things, and the Kwanzaa piece was funny too. But you were talking about, I don't remember how you got on, but you were talking about some of the problems with the Me Too movement, right? And I was like, oh, I want to see what Shamika will say about that. and it kind of led to Sarah's book, and the problems of simply saying, trying to balance, just being logical, like some bad stuff happens to women. It's unfair. We should defend them. But that doesn't mean you can believe all the women. And the reason it struck me, I guess, probably because I was just at a dinner party having a conversation about this. And I was talking about, I don't know, it wasn't the topic, but I brought up Kavanaugh, which is the wrong thing for me to do because we know it's going to be political. But
Come on, Charles.
Right. But look, the reason I brought it up was and I always preface this stuff, I'm saying, you can have your opinion. So obviously the political people were discussing it from a political standpoint, right? So there were people, because I guess I used it because I like it as an example of people being extreme for their ideology. So they'll be like, he might have done it, but I'm a right wing and I want a right wing on the court. So put him on, right? And the left was like, I mean, it's not enough evidence and it's a long time, but I don't like his politics, so I don't want him on. I expect those people. But my concern was, and maybe down the road, it won't be as big of, it still will be morally wrong, but won't be as big of an issue because we're in a technology age. So 30 years from now, you can look back. But I'm thinking because, I'm becoming a man of a certain age. So I'm like, if somebody was to come to my job, they heard about a promotion and they say, I want Charles fired because on June 3rd in 1991, he did this. And I asked the room, simply, it's about 8 people in the room, how do I defend myself? It's not, 30 years from now, you can say, we can track his phone. We can do this. We can do that. Not then. right? So the problem is the people going to, in a country that they're saying fascism and we need democracy, are going back just selectively when they want to mob rule mentality and saying you're guilty until proven innocent. And I said, I mean, did we think about that? And what I found was interesting is back to like Shamika was saying, the elites, the white liberals and all those, they were like, but women have gone through a hard things all along. It was the 80s, so it probably happened. He was wealthy prep boy. And if it didn't, that's just one guy. When you balance that with all the men, the XYZ, while my working class blacks, women and men, was like, that's some BS. I got a father, or I'm a black guy, whatever. They were like, I don't want somebody to be able to just come up 40 years, 30 years later and say you did this when you were 17 and be able to cancel me. So it was interesting to watch the way they did it. So I'm listening. So that's why it struck me. And I wanted Shamika to hear the piece where you talked about the opening of Sarah's book. So Shamika, what was your opinion on that exchange between the two of them?
Actually, I think I got stuck around the waking up, blacked out, but waking up with a strange man.
Uh-huh.
That kind of stuck with me because it was so open. It was just so transparent and so real. That's all I can really remember about the whole exchange, just that portion. I don't even remember who was actually saying it. Was that you or Sarah?
So it's the opening of Sarah's book.
Sarah's book. Okay, yes. And I think you were telling her how you liked it because it was just so, you said it was like a naked woman or something. It was just so transparent.
What's the name of your book?
Right. Keep it naked. And so
yeah.
That kind of stuck with me because you don't often find women who are really willing to be naked that way or emotionally exposed and actually tell the ugly parts of themselves. Right. It's so easy to tell something ugly about somebody else, but it's not as easy when it's you. And so that part actually really stuck with me.
Right. And then of course the part where she got in trouble from the people who are like, come on. It's like, it reminded me of Shamika's opinion on that, because where she wrote about, and she said she didn't do it intentionally or anything. She was just telling a story about when she woke up and she realized what she was on top, right? Yeah. And so to them, it was implying that you were giving this guy a pass because, you know, in their mind, all men in these situations are rapists. So like the college scene, when people say, so they both, the boy and the girl go to a party, they both get blackout drunk. They're both blackout drunk. He's rapist, right? You know what? He should have said, no, but he's blackout drunk. And she, in their mind, was intentional about this. But it's kind of like they were saying it. I took it, Shamika, like they were saying it in a way like black people will say, there's things you don't say in mixed company. I'm kind of, I don't like that you said it, but that's not why I'm mad. I'm mad that you said it in front of people.
Right.
I'm mad that you wrote it so men could read it. Right. Some man is going to hold up your book and say, see, we're both blackout drunk. It's not unfair, that kind of thing. So I think that's interesting because I believe that Nancy, I'm assuming you do, obviously, because of what you said and what you've spoken out about the Me Too movement. What was it? Me Neither? Is that what you called it?
A little podcast called #MeNeither.
Right. Well, so I think that obviously that you talk about everything else evolving, cities evolving, there's been a progression and change in the culture. But I think that whole believe all women hurts their cause.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it can. So, you know, and we all remember when this all started. It started, you know, sort of weirdly, innocently enough. I remember, I think it was Alyssa Milano had like some like little tiny tweet on Twitter, like Me Too was not even a gleam in an eye. And someone just said like,
she stole it.
And she what?
Did she? Stole it from a black woman.
Oh, yeah. From who? From
the woman with the what's her name?
Yeah, we can see her face.
You called that? I said the woman with the. I'm sorry.
We can't think of her name.
But I didn't say anything. I didn't say it out. But yeah, there's a prominent black woman who started the Me Too movement, and Alyssa Milano kind of co-opted.
Right. Okay. So it comes about, and it was just a weird. I mean, you have this collision of, you know, Donald Trump and pussy grabbing, the anger at him, the Harvey Weinstein. It just exploded. It was like when you were in like chemistry class when you were a kid or something, and you put 7 ingredients, boom, and it just was a crazy wildfire. The shitty media men list, people falling left and right.
Oh
All of,
yeah,
all of a sudden,
I almost forgot about it.
sort of like when I talk about the activists in Portland, they realize like, wow, wait, I have power. Then people are afraid of me. Well, you had people, look, of course people are going to make up stories. Everybody, graphic and sex and age and race, people sometimes make up stories because it's going to further their cause. It's the ends justify the means, which they never do. In any case, for a while, you could not say you had to believe women. It didn't matter what, in every instance. So Sarah Hepela's book, my podcast partner in Smoke 'Em If You Got 'Em, it's called Blackout. What is it? Blackout, Remembering the Things I Drank to Forget. The book opens, she's on a business trip in Paris. She's been out doing these things. She wakes up and she's not just on top of a guy, she's riding a dude. Okay. Like she's full on having sex with him and she's in the driver's seat. She does not know where she is. She does not know who he is, but she's gonna play it cool, right? Play cool. Finishes up, whatever. I don't know. They think they even spent the night or whatever. She was in a hotel. Sarah was an alcoholic, and it was soon thereafter where she quit drinking. But there is such a thing as blacking out, which, I think it's not passing out. I didn't really know the difference between passing out and blacking out, but you basically you just don't remember. And she had those. Anyway, I thought it was pretty ballsy to open her book that way, because not only is she kind of taking responsibility here and then becoming sober, but she also, because she's the coolest girl, she's even funny sometimes, which is, crazy. Other people would be like, oh my God, my life is so terrible. Nothing good can happen to me ever again. She's like, we're going to roll. We're going to do things and all this. So when she wrote this, you're absolutely right in flagging it, Charles. There were people like, oh yeah, well, she added that on top thing. So, so like maybe a guy wouldn't look so bad. It's like, no, she added that because that's how the story went. And you actually have to be curious enough and flexible enough to say, there are lots of ways these things happen. And we're not going to blame an entire sex or an entire race or entire political party because it makes our narrative convenient. And that's sort of what we talk. It's funny because we thought we don't really talk about feminism so much, but we do talk about women's stuff. And sometimes it's a little bit contrary, but I think that we're pretty clear-eyed. I have written about some hoaxers, people that have faked things in order to be popular, to be loved, or to feel like they're, part of something that's ironclad. Like, I want to be a figurehead for this fabulous movement, like a Aja Argento. Do you know this name? Tony Bourdain.
Cori Bush.
What?
Cori Bush.
Yeah, I mean, tell me. I don't know the Cori Bush. Do we have time to tell me?
Well, she's a congresswoman
in Missouri.
who
I know
lied about being raped and she needed this abortion, and she just went on and on. But it was really a situation where she was kind of loose and gave it up, and the person didn't stick around. So she just made up this whole elaborate story that when you listen to it, the pieces didn't match. But she wanted this sympathy when she was before Congress talking about it. But anybody with a brain could actually hear that this woman was just telling a bold-faced lie.
When I was
get the clout.
I've said this before and written it before. When I was little, my father told me not to lie. And he didn't tell me not to lie just because it's wrong to lie. He told me because it's too hard to remember the lies.
Right.
And make your stories make sense. So I've heard of Cori Bush. I didn't know her particulars. Sorry about that. But, people also, look, sympathy is very, very powerful. People need it. They want love. They want to, there's this crazy story now about this romance author, Susan Meachin, who faked her own suicide. Which is just like why? Well, when you get down to it, why? Because, maybe she didn't feel like she was getting the love she needed. And she thought, well, maybe if I do this thing, I can watch the internet, love me or mourn me. Seems a little extreme.
Doesn't she have to come alive at some point, though?
She did. She came alive.
To get some milk or get a sandwich or something?
Well, she was alive the whole time. But
I know, but she'd have to come out and then somebody would realize you're not dead.
Well, I think it's a lot of mirrors. But anyway, she did come back to life the other day. So how many people? She and Jesus, they're the two that have come back to life. And she thought people, I guess, would be happy. They were feeling a little betrayed.
Right. And you talked about your co-host. So our missing co-host, Will Riley, wrote a book he has a book called Hate Crime Hoax, where he goes
Okay.
through all I think he talks about what, 50 or 60 or so, just all of
Oh,
these times,
wow.
where they find, and it's ironclad that they were lying, the KKK on the fence, the all this other stuff, the three black men attacked me on the subway, three white supremacists attacked me on the subway, but it was just a girl whose father was strict and didn't want her, she wasn't supposed to be out, so she had to make a
Right.
on and on and on and on, colleges everywhere. So it's got to be a reason why they do it so much beyond the Jussie Smollett's and others, right?
That story, the minute I heard that story, I was like, that's bullshit. I knew it.
For sure.
I knew it. Right?
Sure.
Okay. And my good friend, Robbie Swabe at Reason Magazine was the one. No. Sorry. He was the Covington kids. He was the Covington kids that totally no, didn't happen the way you're saying it. Anyway.
Right. So I just think that, people, they do these things for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I think there's another factor too, really quickly, that causes a societal problem. So you can say there's some good things and some bad. Me too. People take everything too far and all that stuff. But we talk about education a lot. We've had a lot of teachers and professors on, and some that deal with younger kids. And they're saying what they're finding is that there's a relational rot between men and women because of all this. So you got, it's a combination of this fear of being blamed and accused and hoaxes, coupled with this social media and this kind of solitude, right? So you got young kids who don't go out, they don't go to the games, they don't hang out, they don't have sex. Look at the sex numbers, that's going down. They're just doing this, right? So that's going to happen in the next generation. Then you got the people in the 20s and 30s. The companies have in addition to DEI, they got all these rules. This is sexual harassment. Watch this video. Don't touch this girl. Don't go to the bar. Don't go to that. So now they're afraid to date, right? But people are forgetting that used to be where you met people, right? You used to meet people at work, but now you don't want to hang out with the girl at work. So you're attracted to her, but you're not going to ask her out. So all of this is going to have that kind of effect on society too. How are we going to make some babies? We're already making, Joe Biden just said we don't have any babies at all. And we're going to be gone away, and we got to just let people in the borders. But what are we going to do when nobody's having sex and no one's dating and everybody's afraid?
I mean, you hear these stories. I guess I was hanging out with Michael Moynihan again, and he was talking about like people would go to pickup bars, and people were like, what is that? It's like, well, you used to meet people in bars. And then there was this great article about how younger people were not having sex and the reasons why in the Atlantic a couple of years ago. And she was talking to a young woman. He's like, how did you meet your husband? He's like, well, we worked in the same building and we used to see each other in the elevator, and we wound up talking, doing this. And she said, you talk to him in an elevator? Oh my God, I would think that would be so creepy. It's like, what? I talk to people every day on the subway, at the bodega, on the street, like every single day, because that's also a New York thing. But it's like, stop being afraid to talk to people. Just talk. I've never been on a dating app, but I'm like, it's not so actually that hard to meet people. Like, walk outside.
Right.
That coupled with the fact that people are always on their phones. Like, I look at the young people now, they can be 5 or 6 of them in one room. They're not talking to each other because everybody's head is down and on the phone.
Oh, they are talking to each other. They're texting each other. What are you doing? I'm in the corner. Where are you at?
Yeah. And it's like when my classmates and I, when we get together, there are no phones out, because we grew up during a time where we had to entertain each other and communicate. And, we built that type of relationship with each other. My daughters don't have that with their friends and classmates. They just don't have that. They had so many other things to entertain them that they didn't build those bonds and relationships.
And a lot of them don't know how to talk to each other, right? So they don't know how to have these conversations. I mean, they're socially awkward.
They are. Yeah.
I'll say something that Shamika might appreciate. I was really glad that cell phones were not common when I was nursing my daughter, because I looked into her eyes. Now, sometimes I ate and dropped food on her head, and or sometimes I read a book or something, but like there was a lot of time just spent staring into others' eyes. And if I got to tell you, if I had a cell phone then, I probably would have been on it.
Oh, for sure.
So I'm really glad about that.
I know we're getting closer. You got 5 minutes, Nancy?
I do. Of course I do.
Awesome. So I want to talk about writing, because you're a writer.
I am.
And you were talking about, you fell in love with journalism.
I
But
did.
your writing, I look at your writing, I like it because it's gritty. More. I mean, some people are better in the way they write, but then you also you have to judge the things that they write. And so
I
we're
can
talking to
click off now, right, Charles?
huh?
I can click off now,
No, I'm
right?
not trying to
Talking
judge you.
about,
I'm not
right?
trying to guilt you. There's no guilt. I'm not telling you to hurry up and write your book. What are you talking about? But speaking of which, have you finished that? Anyway, somebody's writing a book, and the speed is a little slow. I won't say who.
All
But
right.
but what you write about is so intriguing. It's like it's gritty, right? You wrote about the LA street life. You wrote about a mother dropped their babies off the bridge. You went to interview Gacy. I mean, how did you get to that type of writing?
I follow the stories that are interesting to me. The Gacy story, I interviewed John Wayne Gacy on death row before he was executed. Some young people are not going to know what he is, though I guess they will now. They've made TV shows about him. He was the most notorious serial killer. He was
With the clowns from Chicago,
right,
yeah. Uh-huh.
killer clown.
I didn't know about him
You didn't
until
know
after.
Gacy? Everybody knows Gacy.
Well,
No,
Gacy was bigger than Dahmer.
yeah, but I only heard about him because of Dahmer.
Because of Dahmer.
right.
Anyway,
Anyway,
both in the Midwest. Something about the Midwest. Even the Kool-Aid guy was from Indiana, Jim Jones.
Oh, yeah.
So that story was actually my first feature. I kind of felt I'm attracted to stories where either I just see it and like this doesn't make sense and I got to figure out how to make sense of it, or often like everybody is saying it's one way and I'm like, no, I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think so. And then I have to follow it and figure it out. And I also really enjoy telling stories where I can leave, as one of my favorite editors said, you leave enough air between the lines so that the reader can sort of come into the story and make certain decisions for themselves. I don't like to tell people what to think. I'm not that kind of writer up on a bully pulpit. I follow stories that are interesting to me. Yes, the book I wrote, if people want to buy it, I would love it. It's called To the Bridge, A True Story of Motherhood and Murder. That came out in 2018. And that's another story that everybody was saying, up, evil, crazy, that's it, throw her away, put her in jail. I don't want to hear anything more about it. I'm like, I kind of do. I kind of really need to know how a mother who loves her children decides to drive to a bridge at 1:22 in the morning and throw them over. Like, aren't you curious? Like, don't you feel like there might be a few pieces missing here? And boy, howdy. Okay. Boy, howdy, were there pieces. So it just things that interest me. Sometimes they do include murder. It's not that I'm like, I write about murder, but it's a very, very potent and hard topic that lends itself, I think, sometimes to curiosity. So yeah, that's.
I don't know, Nancy. I gotta say, I think the people you wrote about in your books killed like 90 people.
Well,
and then one of them killed like 70, but still.
That's true. Yeah, no, that's true. And I'm actually noodling on another book that will have some murder in it. So we'll see. But I also write about other things. People, if they want to, they can go over to my Substack. Sorry, I'm promoting myself now.
I was going to ask you to do that now.
Yeah. Nancy Rommelmann.substack.com, or it's called Make More Pie. And I write about a lot of things over there. I went to Ukraine this year. I went over at the beginning of the war. I went to San Francisco when you're talking about cities that are falling apart. I went there both when they recalled the school board members and also when they recalled the DA, Chesa Boudin, the very, very progressive DA. And, I go where I'm going to be going to Baltimore because I'm interested in some stuff that's going on down there. Like you sort of like, as a journalist, it's almost like you get it's not an actual smell, but like your nose kind of leads you someplace. It's like, what is this? And then you get there, and if you start to just figure out what the story is you want to tell, and if you can, bring something to it that other people haven't. And I mean, I have the best job in the world. Like, no doubt, I do. I think I do.
Well, you mentioned the book, and you mentioned the Substack. You might as well mention the podcast as well.
Yes, the podcast is called Smoke 'Em If You Got 'Em. That's wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm on Twitter at Nancy Rom, NancyRomm. And my DMs are open. Sometimes people send me story tips or, whatever.
Or pie. Because you want to
I'm usually the one making the pie. So I'm sending the pie.
We're both, I like pie. I'm here in town. So
you can come over for pie. That's a standing invitation.
All right. Shamika, anything you want to add? Any tips you want to ask about some writing tips? You want to ask about?
No, but I will say that I learned how to stretch my hands this week. So if you do this, can you do this with both hands with no problems, both fingers down?
Yeah.
My
Well,
right hand is a lot tighter than my left hand, and it's more difficult for my right hand to do that and feel comfortable.
Oh yeah, because you got the fingers sticking out right
I
there.
can't
Yeah.
get my pinkies don't, if my fingers are touching my palms, the bent fingers, I can't get my pinky straight. And yeah, that hurts my right.
Yeah, that's a good way to stretch your hands. So
Oh.
you got to try to get them. I've been here the entire time, like trying to hold this and push that back off camera.
She's
Yeah.
like, guys, stop talking. I'm trying to stretch here.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Tamika, you always have something interesting to leave us with. She is Nancy Rommelmann. She is a journalist, author, and pie maker. Nancy, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really fun.
God bless the US of A, land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.